So good morning. Welcome to the Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade Subcommittee on Elderly Fraud. I'm pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today, including representatives of 4 separate federal entities and a state attorney general. By the way, nice timing. The hearing title today goes a long way to explaining why we're here. It's absolutely a growing concern for an expanding population. The fact is, Americans' population is growing older. According to the Census Bureau, from 2000 to 2010, the percentage of Nebraskans over age 65 rose 6.2%, and the percentage of those over the age 85 jumped by 15.8%. The trend is set to continue and accelerate. By 2050, the number of Americans over age 65 is expected to double. Thanks to medical innovation and better standards of living, folks are living longer. And this population tends to be a little wealthier and have better credit than the average American. According to the 2010 census data, the median net worth of households of those 65 years or older was 4.9 times that of households aged 35 to 44 and 25.5 times than that of those under age 35. This fact is not lost on many of the people in this room here today. Unfortunately, neither is it lost on those seeking to take advantage of our seniors, who tend to be more vulnerable and susceptible to some of the many different types of frauds that are being perpetrated. The testimony submitted for today's hearing only scratched the surface in describing the multitude of fraud schemes out there. The threat is very real and does not appear to be just small-time crooks. Everything from home equity theft, letter fraud originating in foreign countries seems to be occurring clearly. There is no shortage of individuals or perhaps organized crime groups working to trick, abuse, and steal from our American senior citizens. One of the reasons we're here today, besides to shed light on this awful trend, is to conduct oversight on the agencies sitting before us and make sure they're doing their best to protect seniors as effectively and efficiently as possible. When reviewing the testimonies, I counted at least 5 separate task forces spread out amongst DOJ, FTC, CFPB alone, some agency-specific, and other intra-agency. My concern is whether or not we are using our resources as effectively as possible and not duplicating them when several agencies have separate working groups set up that may duplicate the work being done at another agency. Additionally, there are all the agencies communicating with each other. For example, what happens when a phone company sends over a list of numbers that have been connected to fraudulent phone calls, like in the widely reported 876 Jamaica phone scam? Does FBI share this list with the FTC? Does FTC share this with private companies within its jurisdiction? Stealing from individuals who have worked and saved their entire lives so that they may live in dignity during their golden years is nothing less than appalling. And we need to make sure government is doing everything it can as efficiently as possible to protect the most vulnerable adults. I look forward to today's hearing, today's testimonies, and thank everyone for being part of this hearing. And now yield to the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky.
I really thank the chairman so much for having this hearing. Much of my adult life has been as an advocate for seniors. For 5 years, I was director of the Illinois State Council of Senior Citizens. The issues of fraud are very important to our older population, in particular for many of the reasons that my chairman mentioned. Seniors represent the fastest growing segment of our population. Every day, 10,000 Americans turn 65. Happy birthday to 10,000 people. Many seniors have certain characteristics that make them an attractive target for criminal behavior. According to the SCAN Foundation, more than 1 in 4 seniors who live alone have difficulty with activities of daily living or some cognitive impairment. According to the FBI, seniors generally have higher net worth, a tendency to be trusting, and are less likely to report fraud. I do want to say that although I agree that the net worth of seniors is higher, the median income of people over 65 is $22,000 a year. So many tend to be cash poor, but perhaps house rich, which again makes them vulnerable. We've seen an uptick in the numbers of products and services that are targeted toward the elderly, anti-aging products. I'm well aware. Health-related products, prize promotions, and reverse mortgages. I'm incredibly concerned about the negative consequences associated with some of those products and services. Reverse mortgages allow homeowners over the age of 62 to borrow against their homes to receive either a cash payment or a line of credit. And while reverse mortgages, if they're structured fairly, can offer financial security to seniors, they can also lead to unforeseen foreclosures and financial hardship. Many former subprime lenders have entered the reverse mortgage market, and the results have been devastating for seniors. According to the New York Times, the rate of default on reverse mortgages reached a record high of 9.4% last year. I offered an amendment which is adopted to the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Consumer Protection Act that allows the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to better regulate reverse mortgages. I look forward to hearing from Associate Director Hillebrand about the status of that rulemaking. This subcommittee must ensure that our federal agencies have the capacity to root out fraud where the problems are so clear and the solutions are within reach. We should especially do so for our senior citizens who have done so much for our country. Again, I thank the witnesses for appearing today. I look forward to working collaboratively with Chairman Terry, as we have, I don't know about uniquely, in this Congress, but certainly on this committee, and members of the subcommittee to address the issue of senior fraud. And I yield now to Mr. Welch.
Attorney General of the state of Vermont. He's been Attorney General since 1997. Before that, he was Secretary of Administration in the administration of Governor Howard Dean. Before that, he was the state's attorney in our largest county, Chittenden County, and he has done an extraordinary job putting the focus on protecting consumers with a particular focus on seniors. And you may remember, Mr. Chairman, we had Mike Smith, who is the executive from Fairpoint Communications, and actually his successor as Secretary of Administration in Vermont to a Republican governor, Jim Douglas, who had a real concern about fraud. And he testified about the Jamaican scams, telephone scams that are really ripping off seniors in Vermont. And Mr. Sorrell has been very active and aggressive on this. And what we need to provide at our level, as both of you so well know, are the tools that our attorney generals and our local prosecutors need back home. So this has got to be a partnership. The policy has to allow you to do your job, but the hard work actually is right at where you all are doing it. So, Mr. Sorrell, I really appreciate it. Also, my first job in politics, his mom was on the Senate Government Operations Committee and was the godmother of all politicians Democratic in Vermont. Now, you may not like that. But we all have very fond.
Is there another type of politician in Vermont?
We're trying to keep it clean. You know what I mean? But his mom was a mentor of Howard Dean and many of us, and we really just admire the Sorrell family going back generations in Vermont. So thanks for letting him be here.
Thank you. And now we yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Tennessee, the Vice Chairman of the full committee, Ms. Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for what I think is a really important hearing as we look at the issue of fraud and the elderly fraud abuse. It is a very complex problem, and the more I've delved into it, the more complex it seems to become. Of course, I appreciate the fact that much of this I'm learning firsthand, as I have a mom who is in her late 80s and just lost my dad, who was in his late 80s. So we're going through this and living it every single day, and I appreciate the good work that you all are doing to help us get to the bottom of it. As we were preparing for this hearing today, I looked at a TBI, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation report, that actually pulled together the numbers of what had occurred from 2009 to 11 in the elderly fraud offenses. And there were over 6,200, nearly 6,300 that were reported, and it accounted for nearly a third of all the fraud victims. The most frequently reported offense was the credit card ATM fraud, and I know you are dealing with that. The majority of the elderly individuals that reported these crimes were related to or acquainted with their offender. And sadly, the number of reported fraud cases we have on hand might only be the tip of the iceberg, because one of the things that I have learned is that many of the elderly are embarrassed to report that this has happened to them, or they're not sure how to report it or how it happened. So there are a lot of factors that come into play in this, and I think there's one other thing that contributes to this, and it is the rogue websites. These rogue websites with rogue financial networks that continue to target our seniors with free goodies and with pirated content, and it's so inexpensive, so affordable. We all know the come-ons that they put out there. Cracking down on those pirated websites is going to be essential to protecting our seniors and allowing them to protect what I term the virtual you, their virtual presence online. And I'm hoping that our hearing today will help clarify the roles that each agency has in preventing elderly fraud and possibly identifying areas of duplicative efforts so that we can more effectively target the problems. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Lance, Vice Chairman of the committee, subcommittee, you are recognized for the remainder of the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fraud perpetrated on the elderly is often a terrible crime of opportunity. With America's baby boomers beginning to enter retirement age, I am happy that Chairman Terry and this subcommittee are examining the federal role in anticipating and preventing this trend. My office receives requests to assist in combating of fraud on a weekly basis. With technological advancements, the criminal element becomes more sophisticated and more difficult to combat. Many scammers prey on American senior citizens, many of whom must navigate a complicated bureaucracy on their own, perhaps as new users of computers or the Internet. It is my hope that Congress, and in particular this subcommittee, can provide the needed tools and resources to prevent current and future fraud threats. Fraud against senior citizens has risen consistently in New Jersey. Nearly 6,400 cases of elder abuse were reported throughout the state in 2010, up from the 2 previous years. About 1 in 5 cases of fraud in New Jersey involves financial exploitation. This is intolerable. I commend groups such as AARP and the law enforcement community for their aggressive defense on behalf of senior citizens. I also commend the New Jersey Division of Aging and Community Services for its work as well. It is my hope that these partners and our witnesses here today will educate the public on the trends and threats regarding this issue. I look forward to hearing your testimony this morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. We'll yield back our time and would like to recognize the full committee. Almost said you. Yep. So, Mr. Waxman, you have the 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this hearing on fraud affecting older Americans. Imagine getting an email from a dear friend that she had gotten mugged while on vacation, that her cash and credit cards were taken at gunpoint, and she needs you to wire money so that she can pay her hotel bill. After you wire the money, you find out that the mugging never occurred. Unfortunately, this emergency scam happened to a senior in my district, and many other similar frauds are committed each day around the country. One may think that fraud is easy to spot, but in the case I just mentioned, the email was sent from the friend's actual email account, now hacked, and included her actual address and phone number. And with the prevalence of social media sites, one can easily imagine a fraudster knowing that a victim's grandchild or friend is on vacation. Last month, the Federal Trade Commission released the results of its most recent survey on fraud, reflecting data from 2011. This report estimated that over 25 million Americans were victims of surveyed frauds, including those that preyed on consumers' desire to improve their health, find a job, or save money on everyday needs. According to the FBI, older Americans possess certain characteristics that make them attractive targets for fraudulent activity. Many seniors have accumulated retirement savings, tend to be polite and trusting, and are unable or reluctant to report fraud or serve as criminal witnesses. They are also targeted disproportionately for certain scams, like those involving price promotions, health-related products and services, and reverse mortgages. And appallingly, older Americans are also exploited financially by those close to them, including by trusted people like family members, friends, attorneys, or financial advisors. Fraud against the elderly is a very serious crime with the potential for severe harm, including lost retirement funds, ruined credit, and an emotional toll on victims and their families that is not easy to overcome. I commend President Obama for recognizing this through his administration's significant efforts to educate consumers about fraud and through his establishment of the Financial Fraud Enforcement Task Force. Federal, state, and local authorities must remain vigilant in the fight against fraud occurring on consumers of any age, and Congress must ensure that law enforcement has the tools it needs to win that fight. This hearing on fraudulent activities is a good start. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witnesses for being here. I do want to apologize in advance because I will be required to be at another subcommittee at the same time, and while cloning is a possibility, it still hasn't, God forbid, come to the level of making another me. And I have some time left. Anybody on our side or either side want the time?
If the gentleman would yield for
Gentlelady
just...
from Virgin Islands? Yield to her.
I just wanted to just say for my part that, you know, fraud committed against the elderly, and I thank you for yielding, against our seniors is an egregious crime. And so I want to thank the chairman and ranking member for holding this hearing. In my district, people over 60 are a sizable population, and we have a fair number of people in their 90s. And so in a place where services are not readily available, they're particularly vulnerable to insurance and other financial crimes, even easy repairs on homes and any number of fraudulent offers that seem attractive, and so they take advantage of them and find themselves in difficulty. So I'm glad we're having this hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. I yield back.
I have a few minutes left. I want to yield to the gentlelady from Tennessee.
I thank the gentleman from California. I was just going to encourage you to send your avatar to the other hearing, and then you could stay with us. You know, I thought that, yes.
Another good idea.
Absolutely. Yield back.
Thank you. All right. We do not need avatar testimony. We appreciate all of you here. I'm going to introduce the entire panel and appreciate all of you being here. And we will go right to left. When you start, Ms. Brown, you are the Director, Education, Workforce, and Income Security with GAO. Appreciate you being here. Joseph Campbell, Criminal Investigation Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And I had mentioned to him earlier that it's always nice that we invite you in instead of you just showing up. That has a little bit different connotation. Gail Hildebrand, Associate Director. Charles Harwood, we're going to let you testify as well. Acting Director, Bureau of Consumer Protection, Federal Trade Commission. and Gail Hildebrand, Associate Director, Consumer Education and Engagement, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And last, already introduced by our good friend from Vermont, we have the AG of Vermont, Mr. Bill Sorrell. So appreciate all of you here, and we will go from my left to right. Ms. Brown, you get to start. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Terry, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to discuss our work on elder financial exploitation. My remarks today are based on a year-long GAO study completed last November. Financial exploitation can result from foreign lottery scams, unscrupulous financial advisors, betrayal by trusted in-home caregivers, or multiple other causes. This exploitation can undermine the health, dignity, and independence of older adults, leading to far-reaching effects for the victims in particular, but for society in general. Victims who lose their ability to support themselves can put additional pressure on scarce health care and social service resources. Much of the responsibility for combating elder financial exploitation falls on state and local social service, criminal justice, and consumer protection agencies, and the problem is large and likely growing. The federal government has an important role to play, and today I'll mention 4 key areas that can benefit from federal attention. First, officials at all levels of government need to better understand the nature and extent of the problem. Data from FTC's Consumer Sentinel Network, FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, and FinCEN's Suspicious Activity Reports can be analyzed to shed light on current trends and schemes to help agencies better determine how to best direct federal resources. In our report, we made recommendations to FTC that we believe would improve the usefulness of the Consumer Sentinel data for these purposes. Second, identifying and preventing financial exploitation, that is, before victims have lost their entire life savings, requires marshaling the efforts of those who interact with older adults regularly in the community, such as bank tellers and medical professionals. In our fieldwork, we were told that bank staff in particular may be reluctant to report their suspicions of exploitation for fear of violating important privacy rules. We recommended that CFPB take steps to help employees of financial institutions recognize signs of exploitation and understand their reporting options. Third, regarding investigating and prosecuting financial exploitation, state and local criminal justice officials told us they could benefit from additional training and support from the federal agencies that have specialized expertise. This is especially true for interstate and international mass marketing scams. We have recommended that Justice launch its planned website that would make resources such as training and primary litigation materials available to state and local officials, and also that Justice conduct outreach to clarify the process for requesting assistance or referring cases to the federal level. And fourth, possibly the best way to fight this problem is through education. Older adults, family members, and the public in general need more information about what constitutes financial exploitation and how to avoid it. This information could range from tips on avoiding scams to shedding light on the many designations used by financial service professionals. Each of the 7 federal agencies we reviewed independently produces educational materials, but we believe these efforts would be more effective if they were part of a broader, more coordinated national public awareness campaign. As you will hear from others today, multiple federal agencies are working to address financial exploitation in ways that are consistent with each of their individual missions. Also, agency representatives have participated in various working groups and collaborated through task forces over time. However, we believe a more cohesive and deliberately planned national strategy is needed to increase the likelihood of success and to optimize the use of scarce federal resources. The recently formed Elder Justice Coordinating Council, charged by law with setting priorities and coordinating federal elder justice efforts, can be an appropriate vehicle for this. We recommended that the Council develop this national strategy along with a clear set of goals and assignments for completing these goals. The Council met this week for the second time and received a set of recommendations from its working group that, if approved and implemented, would begin to address many of the issues I've raised today. This concludes my prepared statement. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well timed. Much appreciated. Mr. Campbell, you are now recognized for your 5 minutes. Is your microphone on?
Chairman Terry, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and members of the subcommittee, I am pleased to appear before you today to discuss the FBI's efforts to combat fraud against our nation's seniors. At the beginning of 2011, the first of our nation's baby boomers reached the age of 65. Since then, thousands a day also reach that milestone. They have many reasons to celebrate. Senior citizens are most likely to have a nest egg, to own their home, and to have excellent credit. Unfortunately, these are also many of the same qualities which make them so attractive to con artists. Unscrupulous loan officers, investors, appraisers, developers, and others are exploiting home equity conversion mortgages, HECMs, also known as reverse mortgages, to defraud senior citizens. HECM-related fraud is occurring in every region of the United States, and reverse mortgage schemes have the potential to increase substantially as demand for these products rises in demographically dense senior citizen jurisdictions. For its part, the FBI continues to develop new ways to both detect and combat these fraudsters. We are working with our partners at all levels of law enforcement and within regulatory agencies, and using the full array of investigative techniques to find and stop criminals before the fact rather than after the damage has been done. Most recently, Nigerian letter frauds combine the threat of impersonation fraud with a variation of an advance fee scheme in which correspondence from Nigeria offers the recipient the opportunity to share in a percentage of millions of dollars that the author, a self-proclaimed government official, is trying to transfer illegally out of Nigeria. The scheme relies on convincing a willing victim to send money to the author of the letter in Nigeria in several installments of increasing amounts for a variety of reasons. To combat the numerous fraudsters who would do our citizens harm, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the National White Collar Crime Center established the Internet Crime Complaints Center, IC3. The IC3 serves as a vehicle to receive, develop, and refer criminal complaints regarding the rapidly expanding arena of Internet fraud. It gives the victims of Internet fraud a convenient and easy-to-use reporting mechanism that alerts authorities of suspected criminal or civil violations. Through the IC3, we are also establishing effective alliances with industry, allowing us to leverage both intelligence and subject matter expert resources. In 2012, IC3 received complaints from more than 42,000 victims over the age of 60, with total reported losses of more than $115 million. The more prevalent scams reported to IC3, which target the elderly, are romance scams, lottery scams, 419-type letters, also referred to as Nigerian scams, and the grandparent scam. The grandparent scam is a telephone scam targeting grandparents and involves fraudsters calling elderly individuals claiming to be a grandson, granddaughter, or other young relative in a legal or financial crisis. The crisis generally involves a claim of being arrested or in a car accident in another country. The callers create a sense of urgency and make a desperate plea for money, begging the grandparents not to tell the parents, while often crying on the phone to help prevent the potential victims from discovering the scam. With jurisdiction over both federal and private insurance programs, the FBI is also actively involved in the Healthcare Fraud Prevention Partnership and the cabinet-level Healthcare Fraud Prevention and Enforcement Team. Since the inception of the Medicare fraud strike force, prosecutors filed more than 700 cases, charging more than 1,400 defendants who collectively billed the Medicare program more than $4 billion. Over 900 defendants pleaded guilty, and over 100 others were convicted in jury trials, and more than 700 defendants were sentenced to imprisonment for an average term of more than 45 months. By working together to stop fraud, we can ensure America's hard-earned dollars are used to care for the sick, and we can keep our nation's health care system strong for those who need it, both now and in the future. Chairman Terry, Ranking Member Schakowsky, I would like to thank you again for this opportunity to discuss the FBI's efforts to combat fraud against our nation's senior citizens. I am now happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Harwood, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Terry, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Charles Harwood, Acting Director of the Bureau of Consumer Protection at the Federal Trade Commission. The FTC has submitted an official statement for the record. My remarks and responses to questions are based on that statement, but they are my views. Seniors are among the many victims of consumer fraud schemes targeted by the FTC. 3 commission efforts, one concerning work-at-home scams, one concerning prize or lottery fraud, and one concerning identity theft, illustrate our law enforcement and education efforts on behalf of senior consumers. Many Americans, including seniors living on fixed incomes or with limited ability to work outside the house, look for ways to supplement their incomes by working from home. Opportunistic scam artists take advantage of this market by selling bogus work-at-home programs that, in reality, just deplete the consumer's resources even further. This past February, the Commission sent out redress checks to more than 50,000 consumers as a result of our successful law enforcement action against the deceptively named Real Wealth Program, a work-at-home scheme that targeted seniors. In its mailings to consumers, Real Wealth claimed, quote, "All I do is mail 30 postcards every day, and I make an extra $350 a week," and, quote, "collect up to $9,250 with my simple 3-minute form." In fact, consumers who responded received nothing, or at most, they received a booklet on how to pitch the very same scam to other consumers. The case highlights our work with partners. First, it was referred to us by AARP Legal Counsel for the Elderly, a local legal services provider here in D.C. And second, we partnered with the AARP Fraud Fighter Call Center to offer injured consumers one-on-one counseling about the fraud. Prize and lottery fraud is also on the Commission's radar screen. Consumers between 65 and 74 years of age are more likely to be victims of such scams, according to the Commission's recent fraud report, which has already been referred to, which was a survey of common consumer fraud schemes. On the enforcement side, the Commission has not only gone after the perpetrators of such lottery frauds, but has also pursued a money transfer company, MoneyGram, that allegedly allowed its system to be used by telemarketers pitching prize and lottery fraud. Complementing our law enforcement efforts, an innovative partnership with the AARP Foundation enables the Commission to refer individuals for peer counseling who are over the age of 60 and who have called the FTC complaining they have been the victims of certain frauds, including prize and lottery frauds. The Commission is the federal clearinghouse for consumer identity theft complaints, which we share with other federal, state, and local criminal prosecutors. And we have been the leaders in identity theft education for both business and consumers. Just last week, the Commission held a workshop to collect information about the extent to which seniors are vulnerable to identity theft. In particular, the Commission is concerned about tax, Medicare, and nursing home-related identity theft. The Commission has invited public comment on the issues discussed at the workshop, and as we learn more, we will share our findings with our civil and criminal law enforcement partners and use the information to advance our education and outreach efforts. As part of our consumer protection mission, the Commission tries to anticipate how fraud schemes may evolve, and we watch for emerging threats. We are watching closely 2 developments that may give rise to frauds directed towards seniors in coming years. One development relates to health care coverage. We know from experience that changes in government programs create fertile conditions for fraud schemes. Scams involving questionable national medical discount plans have been around for a while now and have been the target of a number of FTC and state law enforcement actions. As the Affordable Care Act is implemented, the discount plan scam could easily evolve into an ACA-related scam, sowing confusion and tricking consumers, including seniors, into paying for worthless products or divulging financial account information. The second development concerns the Internet. A recent Pew study shows that the number of adults over 65 who use the Internet is increasing rapidly. As more seniors use the Internet, more will be exposed to fraudulent online offers. We will see more Internet frauds in the future affecting seniors, we think. Indeed, it is conceivable that the Internet scammers will actually target the online seniors as their numbers increase. Finally, education is an essential part of our consumer protection and fraud prevention work. The Commission is widely known for its plain language information on dozens of issues, including family emergencies, which Mr. Campbell talked about, also known as the grandparent scams, and which at least one member talked about, fraudulent prize offers, and government imposter scams. We partner with other government agencies, state and local law enforcement agencies, and community resources to disseminate information. In addition to our broad-based outreach efforts, in a new initiative, the Commission is turning to activities directors and other professionals in facilities where boomers and seniors live and visit for guidance on the kinds of information that people will find useful, the messengers they trust, and the delivery mechanisms they are likely to pay attention to. Ultimately, we expect to provide these professionals with fraud awareness materials and activities they can tailor to and share with their particular communities. Thank you for the opportunity to describe the Commission's consumer protection work on behalf of older Americans.
Thank you. Ms. Hildebrand, you are recognized for your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Terry, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and distinguished members, for the opportunity to speak with you today about the Consumer Financial Protections Bureau's work to address the devastating problem of elder financial exploitation. The CFPB's Division of Consumer Education and Engagement includes our Office for the Financial Protection for Older Americans. This Office for Older Americans is specifically dedicated to the financial health of Americans aged 62 and older. Older Americans have assets that make them attractive targets for fraudsters. The net worth of U.S. households aged 65 and over was approximately $18 trillion in 2009. And these individuals and families may be victimized by a broad range of perpetrators, including scam artists, family members, caregivers, financial advisors, home repair contractors, and even fiduciaries. One national prevalence study found that an estimated 5.2% of Americans over 60 and over experience financial mistreatment by a family member. And other studies indicate that most incidents of elder financial abuse are never reported to authorities but remain under the radar. After a fraud, older Americans have very little time and few opportunities to recoup those lost savings. So to address elder financial exploitation, we recognize that collaboration across and among levels of government is critical. We participate in the congressionally mandated Elder Justice Coordinating Council as a venue for that collaboration. I'd like to discuss a few of the current initiatives at the CFPB to address financial issues and problems faced by older Americans. First, older Americans can lose money because they trust the wrong person to give them financial advice. There are a bewildering array of titles for persons claiming special expertise in providing financial advice to seniors, and it can be very hard to distinguish those persons holding an easy-to-obtain credential from a fully trained professional. To begin to address this challenge, we studied the variety of so-called senior designations and issued a report discussing the risks for older consumers who may rely on these designations. That report is entitled Senior Designations for Financial Advisors, Reducing Consumer Confusion and Risks. Second, we're helping seniors, caregivers, and others in the community avoid frauds and scams. We've partnered with the FDIC to build a new module for the FDIC's Money Smart program called Money Smart for Older Adults. The new material identifies common financial issues that face seniors, including how to spot scams and frauds, and we'll be jointly issuing that material for use across the nation this summer. Third, older Americans who experience declining mental capacity and capacity to handle their finances face special challenges. Even mild cognitive impairment can disastrously reduce an older adult's ability to detect a fraud or scam. 22% of Americans over 70 experience mild cognitive impairment. And experts say that the ability to handle finances is one of the very first life skills to go, often well before family members observe the more visible signs of diminished capacity. This means some seniors need a family member or other person to handle their money. And those legally authorized fiduciaries are a critical source of support, but they often have no training in how to handle someone else's money. Some may fall victim to fraud or even engage in it. So for the untrained person, often a family member who's asked to step in and handle someone else's money, the CFPB is developing a set of guides for lay fiduciaries. These guides will explain what a fiduciary does, how to properly segregate and account for funds, and how to protect the assets of seniors from frauds by others. Fourth, there's a role for financial institutions and for those who regulate them. Bank tellers may be among the first persons to observe signs that an older adult may be the victim of financial abuse, but the bank may be unsure whether federal privacy laws permit them to report this suspicion to social service or law enforcement agencies. So the CFPB is developing strategies for clearly communicating with financial institutions that the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act does not prohibit them from sharing these suspicions with law enforcement and adult protective services. Finally, I'd like to mention 2 resources that CFPB offers to all consumers that are of use to older Americans. At our website, consumerfinance.gov, we offer Ask CFPB. Ask CFPB is an interactive online tool. It provides consumers with short, unbiased answers to their financial questions and includes a special tag for issues that may be of particular interest to seniors. We also accept consumer complaints through our Consumer Response program, and Consumer Response is handling complaints on a wide variety of financial products, including things like credit cards, mortgages, and credit reports. Elder financial exploitation is a serious problem for our country. I commend you, Chairman Terry, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and all of the members of the subcommittee for holding this hearing to put this issue in the spotlight. Thank you.
Mr. Attorney General, appreciate your efforts to get here, and you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My thanks to the subcommittee and particularly to Congressman Welch for the invitation to be here and speak to these issues today. I am not here speaking on behalf of the National Association of AGs nor individual attorneys general, but I would be very surprised if General Madigan or General Bruning, General Cooper, General Koster would disagree with what I have to say as to what we're seeing in Vermont, or disagree with the requests I make for federal assistance. We have a very real problem in the state of Vermont right now with scams preying on seniors, and has been discussed with the aging demographic in this country, it's just going to get worse. Just some of the reasons why seniors are particularly preyed upon by certain scam artists. We've talked about the fact that they tend to have more resources or assets than others, but seniors tend to be more trusting than others. They want to believe that you have their best intentions at heart. They're more polite. They don't as readily hang up or close the door. And not just in rural Vermont, seniors frequently tend to find themselves socially isolated. And a lot of seniors report that they appreciate the call from Jamaica or whatever to interact and talk about religion or the family or whatever. And then, of course, we have to take into account that some seniors suffer from dementia or related diseases, but otherwise, normal aging processes can have an impact on seniors in terms of making reasoned decisions about their financial affairs. My remarks go not to home repair fraud or caregivers or family members who perpetrate frauds. We see that. I want to focus a little bit on the stranger frauds, particularly those that come in from outside the country. We've talked about Jamaica a little bit, but we see a lot of the so-called grandparents scams, the grandson or granddaughter who's supposedly been in an auto accident or has been arrested. They'll say, I have a cold, that's why I don't sound like, or I got punched in the mouth, or I hit the steering wheel in the auto accident so I don't sound like myself. We have the lottery and sweepstakes cases. We had a Vermonter who took out a home equity loan on her house to send the port fees or taxes off to Australia or Canada to get the lottery winnings. We see the romance or relationship scams coming in from out of the country, pen pals that leads to more. And just to bring it more immediately, just in the last 10 days to our consumer assistance program, we had an 83-year-old man suffering from dementia who lost $8,000 in an investment scam, and a 79-year-old woman who wired $29,000 to her dear friend in Ghana. All scams. Truth is, the states are struggling. We need federal help. The Vermont State Police, let alone the Burlington Police Department or the Montpelier Police Department, are not in a position to identify the scam artists from out of the country. We don't have the jurisdiction to arrest them or prosecute them. And the likelihood that we will get the Vermont consumers' money back is virtually nil. We really need federal help. And so there are three main issues I'd like to very quickly mention. we need federal assistance to support research and development of evidence-based programs that go beyond simple consumer education, the flyers, the posters in banks and whatever, of what will work on a sustainable way to help seniors avoid being scammed, put together training materials, send to the states where at the ground level we can use those. So we're looking for effective and sustaining programs, research-based, to change consumer behavior. Second of all, and related to the first, is once we have those training materials and that research, we're looking for the support of state or local networks of individuals who work in senior meals sites, Social Security offices, banks, senior housing sites, to help prevent, through interactions with seniors, scams, identify it when they see it's happening, and then be able to effectively intervene to avoid further harm. And third and finally, we ask the Congress, and look forward to working with our federal partners, to take a look at those players in the marketplace that in their legal carrying out of their business unknowingly or at least facilitate the perpetration of the frauds. And particularly we would look to the wire service industries. And just in 2002, the states had a survey where 58% of the money wired to Canada over the period of the survey was fraudulent. I believe the FTC had an 2007 report where of wire transfers of over $1,000 into Canada during the survey period, 79% were fraudulent. So we would ask the Congress to look at some things at this industry and others, and give protection from antitrust restrictions on wire companies sharing information about vulnerable consumers, maybe some extra hoops for certain wires of a certain amount to certain countries. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I look forward to answering your
Thank you very much. Very informative from all of you. My first comment / question, Ms. Brown and Ms. Hildebrand. My wife is a bank teller, part-time. Kids are getting older, wanted something to do. And about 2 months ago, and this is kind of an impetus for this hearing today, older gentleman, mid-80s, walks into the bank. He's a customer there or has his accounts there. Says, I need a money order check for X thousands of dollars. And my wife thinking, well, this is odd that he's asking for this. And prompts a couple questions. Oh, yeah, what's this for? And he says, well, I'm going to get this money. If I give this X amount of money, $5,000 or whatever it was, I'm going to get all of this money. And, of course, she knew instantly he was being scammed and told him, you're being scammed. This isn't real. You're not going to get this money. I feel very uncomfortable letting you go through with this transaction. No. And he was very, very demanding. Called the boss over, supervisor. Supervisor instantly recognized it. Refused to give him the check that he was asking for. And they didn't know, as Ms. Hildebrand, you pointed out, what their rights were. They just know they were wanted to protect this guy from the mistake he was about to make. So they asked, is there somebody in your family that helps you with your money? And they concluded the conversation, well, bring her in and we'll work with the both of you on this check. And of course, he didn't show back up. But those are very real out there. And so that's just a real-life story that occurred. And so when you mentioned, Ms. Hildebrand, about bank tellers needing to know what their rights are, most of the time bank tellers have a lot of things they have to know about banking law, but how to work with somebody at the counter is probably not one of the things they're really taught. So you pointed that out in both your statements. Now, I'm going to focus my questions a little bit, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Harwood. First question is regarding collection of the data. You mentioned, Mr. Campbell, your IC3, 42,000 registered complaints within that database. Mr. Harwood, I don't know how many you all receive at the FTC in a year span. Do you guys work together? Do you share the data and coordinate your efforts, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Harwood? Mr. Campbell
That's right.
first.
We do share that information, and we feed much of it into the Consumer Sentinel network as well, where it can be shared.
Yes, in fact, Mr. Campbell's correct. IC3 does feed almost all of its complaints, or all of its complaints, except for the murder and fraud type things, I think, to murder and those kinds of things, to the FTC, and they're incorporated into our Consumer Sentinel system. Last year, we received about 2 million complaints from consumers around the country, and our total database is over, I'm going to say it's over 8 million complaints that we make available to law enforcement agencies throughout the United States, federal, state, and local, to use in developing cases.
Now, Mr. Campbell, on the law enforcement side, and Mr. Sorrell brought this up to some extent, and you're dealing with international. How does local law enforcement, how are they able to work with state and federal agencies when they have a person that's been scammed, when there's an actual victim?
Well, certainly with the international aspect, as you can imagine, there are difficulties there in pursuing that. But we do receive information from all kinds of sources, including local law enforcement, in regard to scams similar to the one that you posited. And what we do then is run checks on all of that information, determine if there have been others elsewhere, if it's a pattern, if it's tied to any particular criminal organizations, tied to any particular subjects that we're already focusing on, and determine if in that sense there's a pattern involved that would initiate our involvement. The onesies, twosies, there's so many of them, it's difficult for us, obviously, with resources. But the good thing about the IC3, though, is that they can compile that information, store it, continue to run analysis, and it may come up later that based on the information we get, it's tied to something else that's substantial enough that we'd be able to engage. But we also do share that information with others who might be able to take action.
Very good. General Sorrell brought up a really good point, and that's there are money entities that are enabling the fraud. MoneyGram. General Sorrell mentioned that 58% of the checks going to Canada through this wire service is fraudulent, and even higher when the amounts get higher. How can the FBI work to shut those down? Is there something that Congress needs to do to disable those that are enabling this type of fraud?
Well, I don't have specific information as to what we're doing with MoneyGram and so forth, and I can maybe get back to you on something like that. But in regard to Congress, certainly if there is legislation that could be contemplated, we'd be interested in working through the Department of Justice to consider legislation that might be effective, especially in those cross-border issues which do create a lot of threat problems for the elderly.
Mr. Harwood?
Sure, thank you. So with regard to MoneyGram in particular, the FTC filed a law enforcement action against MoneyGram precisely for facilitating lottery and prize promotion scams that involved Canadian operations. That was filed a couple years ago. We obtained a substantial order against MoneyGram, including injunctive relief and restitution for consumers. Since then, we have instituted a regular conference in Chicago that involves MoneyGram, Western Union, and Green Dot, a newer entry into the wire transfer, money transfer industry. And we meet regularly to talk to them about the kinds of complaints that we are seeing and the kinds of things they're doing to try to deal with the problem. That conference includes representatives from other federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. Third, we've been working with all three of those entities to develop consumer education initiatives so they can actually stop or warn consumers before they wire money offshore and try to discourage them. And then finally, all the complaints that we get from Western Union, MoneyGram, and Green Dot, and we get many, many complaints from them, go into the Consumer Sentinel system, and we make those complaints available to federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies.
Fantastic. My time has expired, and Ms. Schakowsky, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In a June 2012 report to Congress, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau noted that consumers are getting reverse mortgages at younger ages and that 70% of the borrowers are opting for lump sum payments rather than an income stream or line of credit. Unsuspecting seniors who select the lump sum option are particularly vulnerable to fraud given the appeal of quick money. The CFPB has identified property flipping, inflated appraisals, cash-out theft, power of attorney, and third-party imposters as some of the top risks to reverse mortgage borrowers. As I mentioned in my opening statement, Ms. Hildebrand, I offered an amendment that provides the director of the CFPB with authority to issue regulations for reverse mortgage transactions. And I was wondering what the status of the rulemaking process, recognizing that there's some funding issues and the delayed appointment of Mr. Cordray, but how are we doing?
Thank you, Congresswoman Schakowsky, for that question and for your longstanding interest in protecting consumers as they consider whether or not to take reverse mortgages. We started with a study, which I believe was mandated by Dodd-Frank. I think that was part of your amendment to DFA. Quite a comprehensive study. We found that even after housing counseling, some of the basic characteristics of these loans were not well understood. Housing counselors told us that people didn't quite understand that it's a loan and that you're essentially borrowing and using up your home equity as you go. And that was a difficult concept for people who actually were considering taking these loans. We did say in that study, we identified some of the potential future activities. One is regulation, and we said that we expect to undertake a project to improve and integrate the Truth in Lending Act and the Real Estate Settlement Practices Act disclosures for reverse mortgages, because it's a very different kind of product than a forward mortgage, so they would work better. And that as part of that project, we'd consider...
Let me just say, as someone who's been refinancing, some of that paperwork I think is virtually useless. I just want you to say no. I mean, you get this huge pile. You've got like an hour for the closing, and it's flipping through, and just a point there.
I appreciate.
We don't all have to feel better because a piece of paper has been added to the stack.
Well, no, we want to actually make the disclosure work for consumers, and that is a major undertaking and something that we intend to do. As in the meantime, we do have some good consumer education material focusing on the key insight from the study. It's a loan. And then focusing on 4 key questions people should ask themselves. And for all of your constituents, if they're considering reverse mortgage, make certain that both spouses are on the loan. If they're not, you can have a situation where the widow or widower has to either cough up the full amount of the loan proceeds or move out of the family home. So that's number 1, put all the borrowers on the house. And then there are some difficult questions about what your expected life, how long you think you'll live, whether it's worth it. And if you're too young, it also can be quite dangerous to take the reverse mortgage because you have a risk of outliving your money.
The thing that's hard about a bunch of these different scams is that often there is a legitimate offering. A work-at-home program, I suppose, could be legitimate. So what are the kinds of things that we can do to really help people distinguish? I mean, I think that's kind of what you're saying, Ms. Hildebrand, but are there other examples or Mr. Sorrell, I mean, the kinds of things that help people sort through an offer, some of the key things they should be listening for that would alert them. I'm just wondering if anybody wants to add to that.
Well, I'd go back to my suggestion that where the federal government could be really helpful is with some research-based analysis of what can work, because our view is of just straight consumer education, the flyers, the mailers, even the peer counseling, the posters at banks near the teller as to whether this check is actually going to be there. The funds are going to be there 2 weeks from now when it's finally gotten back to the sending bank. That is not adequate. And I think AARP would suggest that just a few weeks after peer-to-peer counseling, the beneficial impact is reduced. So we really would want to see the National Institute of Mental Health and academia take a look at this to tell us at the state level what can be effective for sustainable protection going forward.
I've got a couple seconds. Mr. Harwood looked like he went.
Sure. I would agree with everything that General Sorrell said. That's part of the reason that we've been working with this new consumer education effort to try to talk with professionals and activities directors and others who are at facilities that are frequented by boomers and seniors to try to get a better sense of what kinds of messengers they will trust, what kinds of messages will be meaningful to them, and hopefully in that way help them better educate consumers in a way that's going to be best received by those consumers receiving the messages.
Let me just say it because it's interesting that the gentleman who was actually protected at the bank went away mad. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know? Anyway, thank you.
It is interesting. This time, the gentlelady from Tennessee is recognized for your 5 minutes.
Thank the chairman. And I want to go to Mr. Harwood and General Sorrell. And let's talk about some specifics. So let me use this Jamaican lottery scheme as an example. And I know New England has been hit particularly hard by that. And as these events happen, whether it is that lottery scheme, which is telephone driven, yes, or whether it is some of the rogue websites, what I want to know from you is what are you learning on the ground that you could transfer that information to Mr. Harwood? And then Mr. Harwood, what could you give us as action items where you could block some of these phone calls, block these websites, block the financial networks that are allowing some of the transactions? You always don't have a bank teller who is going to say, nah, you know, I think this is a scam. Let me get some help over here. And so let's use that as a specific and talk about the lesson learned and then the action item, the transfer of that information in the action item. And we've got 3 minutes and 47 seconds to do this.
In 30 seconds, I will say that we don't have the answers. When we are trying peer-to-peer counseling, we go to AARP functions, we go on talk shows, we continue to say if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. But what we have found thus far is that even one-to-one contact, that after a matter of weeks, the protective impact of that gets dissipated.
Okay, let me say then, when you find the action, what are you doing with that data and that information? Are you putting it in the Consumer Sentinel network, or how are you working with Mr. Harwood? Where do you transfer your lesson learned? How are you handling that?
We communicate the information that we have to the federal authorities.
Okay, then Mr. Harwood, what do you do with that? What do you do with it, and what can you advise us would be helpful to do?
Thank you, Representative. So there are a couple of challenges. First of all, we get information that oftentimes doesn't tell a complete picture. So lots of times what happens in these scams is the consumer knows something about what happened and they know they lost some money, but they oftentimes don't know where they sent it. Sometimes it goes through multiple places. Sometimes it's wired to one country but picked up in another country. Sometimes there's an intermediary. I know that General Sorrell has seen all these stories that have come up as well. So the first step oftentimes is try to take those pieces of information that we receive from attorneys general and others and try to turn them into a meaningful picture. And that's where the Consumer Sentinel system comes in, and other analysts come in. You're trying to create where is this money being wired from, where is it being picked up at? And that's oftentimes a challenge, frankly, because these scammers don't want to be found. They're trying to hide behind international borders and behind multiple steps in the process. Nevertheless, we've had some success in that regard. In fact, some companies have stopped agreeing to wire or process money that goes to Jamaica. I think Green Dot has actually, which is one of the wire transfer companies, actually stopped allowing people to remove money in Jamaica because of the number of scams that are coming there. That in part is because of ongoing dialogue with Green Dot about the number of scams.
What about the credit card processors and PayPal, some of those?
I don't think they have taken the same sort of action in that regard, but I would have to confirm that before I could say for sure.
Okay.
The next step is there is actually a federal law enforcement effort that is actually located in Jamaica called Project JOLT. That is a joint effort by criminal law enforcers. I think it's Postal Inspection Service that's leading that effort at this point, but it includes other federal criminal agencies. They are working with local prosecutors in Jamaica to try to shut down some of the scammers in those countries. They use information such as the information from the Sentinel system to help them target the entities they're going after. Of course, the challenge is even when you find them, you have to figure out how to prosecute them and get them extradited to the United States. That is a very expensive process and can oftentimes be a challenge for criminal law enforcers. But that nevertheless is what they try to do. So the information that we obtain is used also by Project Jolt to develop their efforts and to go forward with.
What about the communication companies? What kind of information do you have to give them in programs like Fairpoint?
So this would be, for example, we're talking about telephone companies, mobile carriers, internet. So there are a couple of different things that we've done with them. Obviously, they're aware of the problem that we're seeing here. The challenge has been that a lot of these operations now use VoIP services, so they actually disguise where they're located. VoIP is an automated system. It's very hard to track them down. And so as much as the phone companies like to tackle the problem, oftentimes they can't really see where the calls are coming from, which again, means they can only be of limited service to us. But to the extent that they know what's going on, they do try to work with us.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. At this point, we recognize the son of the godmother of Vermont politics, Mr. Welch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on Ms. Blackburn's questions. Mr. Attorney General, thanks so much for being here. The real question here is at the point where the scam is initiated, or at the point where the victim is coming into the bank, it's at the moment before that actual transfer of cash. That appears to be, from everyone's testimony, the very critical moment. And there's some challenges here. For instance, Mr. Terry's wife, what is she to do when a depositor comes in, has a right to access to the money, but she really does know that this is going to vanish? Are there some things that we can do to provide encouragement and protection to a person like his wife who's going to do what we all think is the right thing?
Well, we had an example up at the Price Chopper in St. Johnsbury. A woman was in trying to wire money, a grandparents scam, and the clerk said, "Mrs. Stowe, I think this is a scam. I don't want to do this." And she said, "It might well be a scam. I love my granddaughter. She needs help. Send the money." But Price Chopper didn't send it, and within a matter of hours learned that it was a scam. So that was an intervention that good for Price Chopper. I don't know legally what could be done unless you're looking at some restrictions of some extra hoops that a wire transfer company would need to go through for transfers above a certain amount to certain countries or would-be recipient locations.
Well, Mr. Harwood, what about that? Because, again, as a practical matter, what the Attorney General told us, I think, is something we all knew. Once the money's out the door, it's gone, and that victim is not going to get it back. And then you also mentioned a lot of victims are so embarrassed that they got taken that they won't even report. Are there things that we can do that would help the wire transfer company, that would help the banks, that would help the Price Choppers, so that when they made a very reasonable judgment that, look, this is a scam, they could take appropriate action to stop it before it ended?
Well, that's a great question. So there are a couple different things. First of all, obviously, we have been trying to encourage the wire transfer companies to implement better procedures that would make it possible to more easily track where the money is being picked up, who's picking it up, that sort of thing. Their current procedures, or at least their historic procedures, have been rather loose in terms of tracking where the money's going.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because they obviously make money each time they make a transfer.
Correct.
So the victim's loss is the wire company's gain, and I'm not attributing motive here, but there's not a strong incentive for them to make that extra step. What would be some of the practical steps they could take, and that we could practically and reasonably require them to take to provide for the protection of the person transferring that money?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. First of all, and some of them have already done this, implement a callback program where they get a certain amount, where they're being asked to wire a certain amount of money before they actually make that wire call back to the consumer.
Well, that's sort of what
mean to do this.
Terry
And some of them are already doing that. It'd be great to see that happening with all the companies. Secondly, more intervention by the actual tellers than we're seeing now. We've got, in some cases, they've got signs up, but not all of them have signs or warnings up, or provide the training. That would be wonderful to see. Third, it would be good if we could make sure that when they wire money to a particular country or a particular location, the more precise we can get information about where that money is being wired, the more likely it's going to be for us to actually target the scam there. Lots of times right now you can wire it to one place but can actually be picked up somewhere else. For example, if you wire it to Vancouver, British Columbia, your money can be picked up in Montreal, for example, which makes it difficult to deal with that issue. And then finally, through our ongoing sort of dialogue with all of the wire transfer companies, we've been pointing out to them which ones seem to have the worst problems. I know somebody commented on the fact there are antitrust issues with them sharing information. We are trying to bridge that by working with them and saying, you seem to have a bigger problem here with this country, seem to have a bigger problem with this country. And we do that by looking at the data we're getting from all of them through our consumers.
So you from the FCC would be okay with allowing for sharing of information when the goal of that sharing was to protect against victimization?
Well, I'm not an antitrust attorney, but I would certainly do that, because I think there would be significant consumer benefits in that regard.
So you wouldn't object to us doing the right thing here?
Not at all, no. Even for competition purposes. Yeah.
Okay.
He may not be able to speak for the Justice Department, though.
All right. Do I still have some time? Minute? Oh, thank you. Well, I just want to ask the FBI, Mr. Sorrell, the Attorney General, was saying that the Montpelier Police Department, Burlington Police Department, they don't have all the resources. But I've noted you guys are kind of busy yourselves with a few things going on. And wire transfers are probably not things that you have a lot of agents to chase down one after another. What I think might be helpful, Mr. Chairman, is that we ask the FBI, the FCC, and maybe the National Association of Attorney Generals to give us some concrete ABC, what we can do that would help at that point of transfer so that we're stopping the transfer before it's impossible to catch up. Would that be something that you all would be willing
We would
to work
welcome
on?
that.
I'd be glad to do that as well.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
All right. Thank you, Peter. And at this point, recognize Mr. Lance, the Vice Chairman of this subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Ms. Hildebrand, you discussed that the fact that financial advisors, sometimes the elderly, trust the wrong advisor. Could you explain briefly how your authority differs from that of the SEC?
Thank you. Let me start by describing in a little more detail our study. It was a congressionally mandated study on senior designations. We found a wide variety of these designations. There's one you can get by taking a 100-question multiple-choice test with no education, all the way to ones that require graduate-level education and substantial professional credentials. But the initials are quite similar, and it's very hard to tell one from the other. So we issued the report with the analysis looking at things like what's the educational requirement to get the designation? Is there any ongoing checkup to see if you're still qualified by the entity that gives the designation? And things of that. Is there any oversight? Can a CPA license can be taken away by your State Board of Accountants? Can the designation be taken away by the conferring agency? And we found a very wide variety and have recommended that the agencies that do licensing think about adding a feature to their license check sites that say you can check on this too. You asked a slightly different question. I'll try and answer it.
Are most of these designations determined by state entities?
The designations are conferred by private entities, private bodies that give the designations, but most of these folks also have a license of some kind, and many of them hold a state license.
And the state license would be CPA
It could be a
or
CPA license, it could be a financial planning license in states that license those, it could be an insurance agency license, agent license.
And is there a broad array across the nation as to these designations and whether or not they are overseen by state capitals?
Yes, the licenses are overseen by the state licensing bodies, but generally there's no one overseeing the designations, and that's why we raised this issue, to bring it partly to the attention of those who license the individuals who hold the license to look at what they're doing with the designation as well.
Thank you. It seems to me that scam artists are brazenly open about their business, and I'm not sure that current penalties deter them. To the FBI, do you believe that we need more severe penalties to deter scams and fraud?
Well, again, we'd certainly be interested in working through the department in regard to studying potential legislation that might
This is
change
the
those
Department of
requirements.
Justice?
And the Department of Justice, that's right, in regard to maybe considering stiffening those penalties. That's correct.
And from your perspective, what is the most egregious situation where you think penalties might, stronger penalties might be appropriate?
Well, that's difficult to say. I mean, because with each of these scams, they impact various victims in different ways regarding their life savings, personal issues, that type of thing. So I think more research would probably have to be done in order to sort of categorize maybe what's more egregious or has specific factors related to it that might mean that there are aggravating factors, that type of thing.
Thank you. Thank you. To whoever on the panel is expert in this area, I'm not as familiar with reverse mortgages as I should be. Are there several national reverse mortgage companies, or is this widely dispersed across the nation? Perhaps Ms. Hildebrand, yes.
Yes, thank you. There is a program federally insured, and providers generally will provide that, the so-called HECM mortgage. That's the more common one. Consumers do have a choice there to take it all out in a lump sum or take monthly payments. If you take it all out in a lump sum, you're at risk of someone stealing it from you after you have it in your pocket. And that is a danger that is very hard to understand when someone says to you, would you like this dollar amount or so much per month?
And are reverse mortgages regulated at the state level, or are they regulated here?
At the federal level.
At the federal level. And who does which agency does the regulation?
There are requirements under the Truth in Lending Act, and we have the regulatory responsibility at the CFPB. As you know, under Dodd-Frank, there are multiple entities that can enforce Truth in Lending Act, and we are among those entities.
Thank you very much. I yield back the 15 seconds I have left.
Very well. Thank you. Now we recognize the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Long.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here today. General, let me ask you on my notes here from your testimony. Earlier, you said that the federal government could be a benefit to you by research and development, training materials, change consumer behavior, and then you said something about protection from, was it antitrust, or did I write that down?
Yes, that was the issue Congressman Welch raised, and there are concerns that there might be some antitrust restrictions on companies that wire funds sharing information with each other about their customers who are vulnerable to being scammed, and also possibly the sharing of information of as to locations to which money is being wired, that there have been complaints or reports of high percentages of
So that's something we could help you with on a federal level?
Very much so, yes.
Okay, I'd like to get something in writing from you later if I can. Later, in answering the question, staying with you, General, you mentioned AARP could be of benefit to us or to you or something. Can you explain that or how that worked?
All right. Well, AARP is very concerned about seniors generally and being scammed, and there was a wonderful meeting, a very beneficial meeting at Stanford a couple of years ago that AARP was behind and trying to bring academia and enforcers together to deal with issues about how to better protect seniors from being scammed. And I think,
you know what they define as a senior? How old you have to be to join AARP? Or?
I think it's 50. 50 or I've been a member for so long I've forgotten when I became eligible.
Well, you might be interested to know that some of your money is being spent to send out literature such as this from the AARP. And it says, according to our records, show that you haven't registered for the valuable benefits of AARP membership, even though you are fully eligible. Please return the above form with your payment to receive your membership kit and new card for you and a household member. Their membership is included at no additional charge. It's pretty tempting because you're going to get a free insulated travel bag if you send this in with the appropriate dollar amount. And they even got a card in there for my daughter because the letter's addressed to her and she's 24 years old. Well, it says on here you got to be 50. But is this normal? I mean, do they have why would they send something to a 24-year-old kid?
I assume that was some mistake, but I can't speak for AARP on that.
Well, I've tried to contact them. My office has tried to contact them, and they said that they will call me personally on the matter. I don't know why they can't share information with my staff, but anyway, I qualify. But my 24-year-old daughter doesn't. Let's see. Ms. Hildebrand, on you're talking about SEC and bad advice, not the SEC, but you're talking about bad advice with financial brokers. Is that what you were, financial advisors?
Financial advisors, yeah.
Okay. How do you ascertain there's good financial advisors out there. There's financial advisors that have a good reputation, and then there's some other financial advisors out there. So how do you ascertain whether you're getting fraudulent advice or someone's scamming you, or if they're just, maybe they've got a really, really good reputation, but they are putting you in mutual funds that they get a big payoff on every time they sell you one, and they churn your account, they decide to put you in another one. So where does the fraud lie? I mean, how do you decide if you're just someone's getting bad financial advice or someone's being scammed?
So you've raised a difficult question for individual seniors who are investing their life savings and need to make good choices for themselves. It's a complicated market. There are a lot of licenses. There are a lot of these people who have the word senior in their title, and that's what we focused on in our report, is people who claim to have specialized expertise for seniors. Of course, individuals need to get references. They need to ask. We do know there are some danger signs. Any advisor or salesperson who tells you the door is closing, act now, that can be a moment to stop and say, I want to think about this more carefully. We have seen some difficulties associated with the so-called free lunch programs, where people will assert that they are senior specialists, give you a free lunch. It's actually a sales activity, but it's maybe pitched as an educational activity. That's a danger sign. But it's a complicated and difficult choice for people.
I would think it would be, because there's a lot of financial advisors that operate their businesses in different ways, and they may have had a client for years and years and years and years. And I mean, I don't know where you draw the line between poor financial advice and fraudulent financial advice, I would guess. And real quick for Mr. Campbell, on mortgage scams, we had a tremendous run on real estate scams. I was a real estate broker for 30 years, and before I came into Congress, in our particular area, southwest Missouri, Springfield in particular, we had a lot of fraudulent real estate companies there that some people have gone to prison, others may. But as far as a mortgage scam, how does that work exactly?
Well, it's the same type of thing where we'll receive information either through contacts we've made within that industry or from victims themselves, and then we look into those issues. And if it turns out that there's a pattern there, again, if there's some kind of criminal organization behind it, a dollar loss of significant amounts, that type of thing, that's going to trigger then potentially our.
What's a mortgage scam? I mean, is it the broker collecting, not the real estate broker, but the mortgage broker collecting too much commission, or what's right. I know how the real estate scams work, because we had that prevalent in our community, and they'd run ads on the radio and signs everywhere where you could, get in for nothing, and then you buy this house and they'd finance it, and then they'd talk you into buying another house and another house at a bigger value. They'd give you the profit off that one, then pretty soon everything collapsed. But a mortgage scam, and I'm past my time, but real briefly, can you just give me one example of how one would work, a mortgage scam?
Well, that's all generally the same. Those are mortgage scams. The same with the reverse mortgage scams, that type of thing. Straw buyers, and then.
But I'm assuming there are legitimate reverse mortgage companies out there, correct? Good reverse mortgage companies.
There are, yes, that's correct.
Okay, because I think I don't know that much about their business, but it seems like they've taken a pretty good hit today, and haven't heard anybody say there are some good ones out there. So anyway, thank you all for being here.
Gentleman's time has expired, and the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a really, really important hearing, given the demographic wave that's coming at us and how many seniors potentially are going to be exposed to these scams. And Ms. Hildebrand in particular, I'm gratified to hear the efforts that the new Bureau is undertaking in this area. in that sense, the Bureau arrives just in time, given what's coming. I've been intrigued by General Sorrell's observations about how things that we might believe would help our seniors in terms of, education efforts, posters, even peer counseling and so forth, really, in some instances, aren't that effective right out of the gate or lose their effectiveness over time. And it seems to me that's a huge challenge in this. And I wondered if you could speak, and any others on the panel who'd like to, just about kind of the difference between passive outreach, if you will, and education versus ongoing active outreach, and what some of the how you enlist third parties in that, how you enlist those who have the occasion to interact with seniors on a more regular basis to be kind of part of a comprehensive network of resources that are helping those seniors be much more vigilant. How potentially you enlist families to be on the alert that their parents or their grandparents may be at risk for these kinds of scams, because we can delude ourselves into thinking that we're doing enough, and in fact that may not be happening. So I'll just throw that to you.
Thank you for that important question about how we can all be more effective in helping seniors and those who work with them to protect themselves. We agree. It's not, here's a brochure and good luck with that. We need to actually get in at the moment when people are thinking about these financial issues, being approached by a scammer, and that's very hard to do. But there are some points of light with the Money Smart for Older Adults program. That's designed to be given in person at senior centers and community centers by a lay volunteer, a community trainer, because it plays on what General Sorrell pointed out. People, want to be together and talk about issues. The Financial Services Roundtable has done some training for banks to give to their own tellers to identify those risk spots. And we have a project now. We're looking not only at educating seniors, but we need to educate the caregiver generation. We need to educate those folks who seniors may be turning to in their communities and also in their families. And finally, there's one other form of person in between the senior and the scam, and that is folks who provide congregate care settings. So senior housing, assisted living, nursing home staff, and we are putting out a guide later this summer for the professionals who work in those places to spot the first signs of elder financial abuse. So it may be that it's a senior who has trouble making their homeowner's payment to the senior homeowners association. That may be an indication that someone actually is tapping them for money and draining their account. So we are trying to build that layer in with people who are reaching seniors in other ways to be aware of and to spot and to start to cut this off before the money is lost.
General, does your office have like information hotline or like something that, or do those sorts of things exist where it's sort of you put out if you're getting a call or if you're curious or you're worrying about a scam, you can call this number?
Yes, we, in a population of about 630,000, we have a consumer assistance program with toll-free number. We get between 5,000 and 8,000 calls a year, questions, complaints, and such. We do a lot of web-based consumer advice. We invite seniors to sign up for consumer alerts. We go around to seniors centers and make these kinds of presentations, but it feels to us that despite all of those efforts, as I mentioned earlier, just in the last 10 days, we're seeing seniors in Vermont lose thousands of dollars despite our best efforts. And
I'm about to run out of time, but do you think there could be more opportunities for like public service announcements on television and other places that sort of offer seniors an opportunity to call into a hotline and so forth?
Well, one of my suggestions for federal assistance is funding for more academic study as to what will be effective. And what we've been trying is only moderately successful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sarbanes. This time, gentlemen, Mr. Johnson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the panel for being here today. Also, I represent the Appalachian, Ohio district, which runs all along the Ohio River. We have a very large senior population, and so the testimony and the evidence garnered from this hearing is very important to the people that I represent. Ms. Brown, starting with you first, your testimony contains a frightening statement that the financial fraud perpetrated against elders is reaching epidemic proportions. Is this because of a growing senior population, because of the reach of the Internet, or something else?
I think it's a combination. I mean, the first and most important factor is the significant growth in the senior population and the proportion of our population that are seniors. And when you combine that with the many different new opportunities with different things like the Internet and ways to reach seniors, and I think the third factor that we've heard about today is that there are new sets of caregivers that may not be aware that their parents or those that they're caring for are becoming vulnerable and in vulnerable positions yet.
Sure. I have an 80-year-old mother, and I can tell you it is a full-time job for my siblings and I to keep her out of trouble. About every week she's got another good deal that someone has laid out for. Mr. Harwood, you testified that you try to anticipate future areas of concern. How do you read the tea leaves, and what data do you use to identify emerging threats?
Thank you. That's anticipation. It's challenging. As I indicated, though, based on past experience, we know some areas where scams tend to evolve. For example, where there are new programs or new initiatives, frequently federal government initiatives, scammers are opportunistic. They see confusion that surrounds those new programs and new initiatives, an opportunity for them to create confusion and defraud consumers and seniors. So we watch for those kinds of things emerging. Secondly, when we look at things like surveys showing the tremendous growth among seniors with regard to Internet usage, and we've been seeing a lot of that in the last few years, that reflects at this point younger seniors who are moving online, but obviously there's a much greater usage of the Internet by seniors, which leads us to suspect that we'll see more frauds on the Internet that are targeted to seniors or at least attractive to seniors.
Sure. You bring up a good point. You testify that a Pew study shows that seniors over 65 are rapidly going online. More of them are. My 80-year-old mother's one of them. I spend more time doing remote diagnostics than I do anything else. And I'm an IT professional, having spent 30 years in the industry. Are there special scams that they should be aware of or take precautions to prevent? And let me, before you answer that, we've talked here in the House about cybersecurity. Given the magnitude of the threat that you folks are laying out, do we need a more proactive, almost like identifying hackers and intruders into our networks? Do we need some kind of offensive operation to identify these scams so that we can put the word out to seniors and let them know about it?
First of all, I'm not a cybersecurity expert, so I can't tell you. I don't know whether that would
answer to the second one is yes. So that's good.
Okay, fine, good. We'll answer it. As to the scams, I think there are scams that are particularly likely to be attractive to seniors. We see more and more scams that involve age-related, associated with age-related maladies, health issues, things like that are appearing on the Internet, arthritis-related, diabetes-related products being marketed on the Internet and elsewhere. Some of those are particularly conditions that are more prevalent among seniors. I think probably some of the investment or scams, things like that, may be attractive to seniors as well. To the extent those migrate the Internet, we may see some of those as well. The point is that the various scams that used to be targeted to seniors and were marketed to them through mail or through telephone as more seniors get on the internet, you're going to see those scams migrate the internet as well.
Quickly, to what extent are any of these scams originating outside the United States? Do we have any cases of cross-border issues?
Many of them, I'm sure, particularly on the internet, it's easy to market across international borders, and we see a lot of scams that have significant international connections. The FTC has filed a number of cases over the years, but of course the international border it can be a challenge for law enforcement.
I have a lot more questions and no more time. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Such is life. Jen and I have one question that we're going to ask you before we gavel this hearing, and that's each one of you, Ms. Brown, going to start 30 seconds, minute. Give us the one thing you want to leave us with, the message to us. What can we do?
What you've heard today is a lot of wonderful ideas and a lot of good, positive actions with good intentions. And what concerns us is that there seem to be scattered in so many different directions. Each agency has its own responsibility, and they're fulfilling it. And that's why we believe that there really needs to be a comprehensive plan where we're looking across the board at how we can marshal those resources in the best possible way.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes, sir. I think increasing the partnerships, as we discussed here today, is going to be important in sharing information. I also would encourage the public to visit the ic3.gov website to obtain information about all the scams we're talking about today. And there's also another website they produce called lookstoogoodtobetrue.com, and it explains in very plain language all of the definitions of the scams that we've spoken about here today, and information that if you suspect you're being scammed or someone you know, there's good information there. And please call the FBI or your local law enforcement as well if you believe that there is a scam occurring. Good
counsel. Mr. Harwood.
Well, thank you. I'm actually going to steal an idea that I suspect General Sorrell is going to make as well, which is more research. I actually participated in the Stanford event that he talked about, and it was clear that we are deficient with regard to research that would help us understand why seniors are being defrauded or how they're being defrauded, what kinds of messages are working with them, what kind of experiences they have. That research would also help us better target our consumer education effort. In fact, also would probably help us target better our law enforcement efforts if we have a better sense of what works for those efforts. So I would strongly urge more research and more study, both by academics and more applied research looking at what messages work for seniors.
Thank you. Ms. Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chairman Terry, and I commend your wife on her care for her.
I will pass that on.
Please join the CFPB in encouraging the older Americans who you serve to speak up and speak out about elder fraud and elder financial abuse. The more people stand up and say, this nearly happened to me, and here's how I spotted it, and the more they say, it did happen to me, and I'm telling you so that it won't happen to you, the more we're going to be able to spread this word. Thank you.
Good point. General Sorrell.
Again, my thanks for the opportunity to be here. I just want to repeat the states need help. There's a real federal role here with financial support and resources. Look forward to working with the Congress and the federal partners to do a better job to protect seniors in this country.
Well, I want to thank all of you for your efforts here, your information, your testimony. It's going to be helpful for us deciding how to best help our senior constituents. I do want to add that probably the main driving impetus was not only my wife's experience at the bank, but Jan's passion on this issue. So she has a long history of working that area, and her election to Congress just transferred where her voice is heard. So with that, I ask unanimous consent to have a letter from the National Consumers League included in the record, and it's been shared with the minority. And without objection, so ordered then. And again, thank you to our panel. I want to remind the members that they have 10 days to submit additional questions for the record, and then if there are any questions submitted by the members, they'll be sent to you. And we respectfully request timely responses, and multi-months is not considered timely by most of us. So with that note, we are now adjourned.